Hello and welcome to the Product Opscast with Graham Reed and Antonia Landy. Welcome, Antonia. How are you this morning?
I'm very well, thank you, Graham.
Today we are joined by Julian Della, User Insights Manager at DuckDuckGo and author of Building the Research Engines. We've got another author on the show for us, which has also been a continuing theme. I'm really looking forward to learning a lot more about kind of research ops. It's an area that I openly admit I'm not as au fait on as other areas. So I'm really looking forward to this today. Julian, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Do you want to take a couple of minutes just to tell us about yourself and your background and the book a little bit as well?
All right, I'm a researcher specialized in research operations. So I've been doing research for around 11 years. Now it's going to be the 12th. Time flies, right? I actually started as a product manager. When I started in tech, my first 2 years were as a product manager, and then I started shifting towards research. And when I became a researcher, what happened is that I joined companies where there was no research at all. There was no practice. There was no culture of research. There was no infrastructure to do the research. So that happened one time. I kind of like learned by doing, but also like out of necessity. I was like, well, I need to do research and I don't know where to start. So I started learning all the operations part. Then that happened again and again. And at some point it's like, well, this is not random. I probably am being intentional about my choices. So that's where I started specializing in this. I like to call it research operations, like for from scratch, right? It's like for small teams, for the solo researcher, for the PM who's trying to get research started, or for the designer. And I started documenting everything. I started writing online and giving talks and so on. And recently, like this year, I wrote my book, Building the Research Engine, which is it's a research operations book, but it's not only for researchers. It's actually a book that's also aimed, or it was, I thought could be useful for designers and PMs want to get started, because usually, I mean, there's companies that have researchers now and it's slowly getting there, but still the majority of companies don't have a researcher in house. So the task of getting research started usually falls on the on the designer or a PM or maybe another role, maybe a leader, a manager. So I wanted to help these people out and say, well, this is the toolkit crafted by a researcher specialized in research operations that you can use from a different role too.
Oh, no, I'm instantly hearing product operations, the
Right.
parallels between, starting it from scratch, being a small team and actually how that as a role. And I think that's an interesting place to start, actually, that being a role that before something is established is typically taken on by a leader or somebody else that, maybe does it kind of, I wouldn't say almost say part time, but does it kind of on the side of their existing job again, which is what we see so often before product ops kind of then gets established. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience of that in particular, where that kind of pain point really reaches almost a critical mass before kind of, no, actually, do you know what? We should do this professionally. We should do this properly rather than just let somebody else kind of have a go at it.
I think this problem starts when people realize that, well, we need to build everything around it could be product ops, it could be everything around the research that enables the research to happen. So sometimes they're like, well, we just like do research. It's, yeah, we just like reach out to customers, we talk to them, we do some stuff. But in the end, you need a lot of stuff around. And then people start realizing, well, it's not that easy. Well, we need to probably carve out some time if you want to do it intentionally, and if you want to make the most out of that, right? So what happens is that I like talking about the difference between doing research and building a practice. And that's probably where this lands, right? People think that doing research is like, well, it's just like I have this question or I have this decision I need to make, and I just go and do some research. I talk to some customers, and that's pretty much that. But that's usually like ad hoc stuff. It's not scalable. It's not, you can't really replicate that. Everybody's doing it differently. And every time you do that, you start from scratch again. So when you do this a couple of times, you realize, oh, well, I'm just like, this is so overwhelming and I need to change how I approach this. Otherwise I will just keep research altogether, and then I will start making decisions based on gut feel or other things, right? Like we can dig deeper into decisions later on, but this is where it all starts. So at some point is realizing, well, we need to build something, right? Build something that will, a system, an operating system that could enable us to do more and better work. And I know at the beginning it's a bit tough because you're like, you probably see the same product ops work. It's like, well, I need to do my PM job, and then I also need to build the rails, right? Like you need to do the pipe work also. And in research is the same, and also in design is the same. Like every ops work starts like, well, I'm the person doing the hands-on work. I need to carve out some time to do that. And how do I get that time? And how do I get the buy-in to say like, well, I'm going to spend 25% of my time doing this, like building something, building the operations that I need, building the things that will help me do better work in the long run. And I think that's where it all starts. Like, how do you get that first 20, 25%? And then afterwards, like when you start doing that, and if you want to take that to the next level, because maybe you start in the researcher case is a little bit different because sometimes you don't have a large research team, but when you are a product ops person and you are like a PM and a product ops figure at the same time, maybe you have other PMs who are like, oh, great, and that's fantastic. Let's just I want to do that too. And then at some point you have more people and say, well, why don't we hire someone to do that, or why don't we make this into something more established? So that's usually when you have three people interested in that, that's where you kind of like crystallize it into a position. But before that, it mostly how do I get like bits and pieces of time to work in this? Because in the end, you need that, right? It's like otherwise, it's just like every time your efforts are. It's like going to the gym, right? And if I go to the gym once every month, I'm not gonna get fit, right? Every time I go, I just start from scratch. But if I want to get fit, I want to go at least twice a week. And I also want to maybe do a little bit do a little bit of work on my nutrition. So this is how it all starts, right? So it's more intentional, and it's like different parts, and it's actually like a long game, right? It's like that's what I would call it too.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I feel like researchers are kind of under a curse. I feel like if you don't have researchers, people dramatically underestimate the amount of work that goes into it. But when you do have researchers, people then keep complaining about how research takes a really long time. And I feel like it's that tension point between how do we move towards better practices and these sustainable practices as well, while at the same time making sure that the research work we do is of a high enough quality, especially when we ourselves maybe might not be researchers.
That's a good point. I also have to say that there are some things that we could improve from the research side. Many people come to research, and maybe some researchers will get angry by me saying this, but like the research field there are people coming from different backgrounds, and the people who are more like closer to product environments, other come from other types of work, and sometimes like adapting to the pace the product organization has, sometimes it's a bit challenging. And I've seen some of these issues happen, right? Sometimes researchers, they disappear for 2 months and then they come back with results nobody ever heard of before. And like the team has moved on already because the product team has like moves at a different pace. And those are probably some of the things or the issues researchers face sometimes. But this is also on the researcher side, right? It's not just like, well, people don't get what researchers do, and it's like it's all and it's like that's probably the opposite of what I would think, right? It's like, of course, the first I always start with myself, right? It's like if there's something I can change, it's how I behave, how I work, and how I think. So that's also part of what researchers should adapt to, right? So we need to understand how the company moves, how fast decisions are made, where they are made, and so on. And tapping into that and connecting our work to that is key. Having said that, there's a minimum time or like a minimum time frame that research requires, right? It's like you just cannot produce insights at the speed of light, right? At some point it's like, well, we can find ways around it. We can say like, well, we need less rigor for this decision, more rigor for that decision. We can play, I'm not saying necessarily cutting corners, but we can find our way around it and kind of deliver insights as we do research. So there are ways to speed that up. Also, if you have your operations oil, you can also make that faster. But at some points, like there's a path that you can really cut. Like this is going the time that this is going to take, because we need to talk to users, we need to talk to the right people, we need to find them, we need to do that, and that's. I mean, now with AI, things are getting even messier in that sense. People are just like, well, just like go and ask an AI, and that's making things worse. But that's probably a different topic. But I do get that feeling, right? And I think it's something that happens on both ends. It's also on the researcher side.
I think I'd love to drill down onto the piece that you just said there, related to AI, because I've written down a question here, and as I wrote it down, I'm not even entirely sure I understand the question myself. The question is how much do you feel at the moment in many businesses, particularly if they have not really invested well in research, that they are using research basically to prove a plan they already had, as opposed to genuinely going out and finding what we should be doing next, if that makes sense, So, the leadership have come back with a fantastic, weird and wonderful idea, and they've gone, right, research, go and prove that this is what we should be doing, as opposed to really going at it with an open mind, or even kind of coming back with, no, that's wouldn't even have been on our radar. Here is what we should be kind of looking at doing. Research really is the very early point, or one of the very early points in the life cycle. What are your feelings on how this is actually being done, or is it much more kind of just part of the validation?
That's a really, really interesting question. And this is what I call the research checkbox. And it's like, well, we did research. We validated what we had in mind. With AI, this is even worse now, because now it's like, well, we just like take, I don't know, AI generated users, or some call them synthetic users and so on. They're just like cherry picking and manipulating that, just saying, well, we did some research. Yeah, here you go. And we can go for that. So that's a common thing. And that's part of when you want to start building a practice and building the whole pipework. You also need to diagnose your organization and how decisions are made and how people feel about that. I call that the culture. Is one of the pillars in the book. I talk about 3 pillars. The culture one is like, how do people feel about evidence gathering? How do people make decisions? Who calls the shots? How is the stakeholder map and all that? And this is one type of organization where leadership or maybe some roles have already ideas, and they are tolerant of research as long as it agrees with them. That also puts research in a tough position, a tough spot, because sometimes you need to be telling hard truth to people and they don't want to hear that. So at some point it's like, well, we don't need research. They always say no to whatever we propose. And that's how you start having that. Usually researchers navigate that pretty well, at least we should. Normally, if you're facing that, what I normally say is that, well, how can you go from there to something more, as you said, to something more proactive? Right at the beginning, it's like, well, where should we be looking at? What should we be thinking of? What are things that we should consider? How do we move from, hey, can you check if my idea makes sense, to like, okay, what kind of idea should we be discussing? So I think you can build a bridge there. And as a researcher, you start with like saying, this maybe, imagine you need to validate something and it didn't go that well. You say like, well, this, you start going pointing a little bit backwards, right? It's like, well, this didn't work out because this of this and this, but maybe if we had considered this could have been a little bit different. And then you start like, why, you can then propose like, why didn't we consider this from the get-go? Did you know about this thing before you had this idea? And then when you start saying, did you consider this? Did you have this information? When you start talking like this, people start realizing, well, we should have done this before. I have to say, though, that there are some cases in which, I don't like the word validation, though, but like, well, that's kind of accepted, if you want to say, depending on the altitude, or in the book I call them gears. So the different gears in which you can make decisions could be interface, feature, product, or strategy. There are different layers. So in some layers it's fine if you're gonna go and say, well, we had this idea, we designed this, can you try that, see if that's usable, see if users understand about, but you already made that decision. In those cases I would be kind of tolerant of that. But there are some others in which you need to shift the conversation a little bit. It takes a lot of time because you're kind of changing how people think and questioning how people think, and then you start getting into the something about the emotional component of all this, right? So we have the rational, we have the data, and you present the data, and we are rational beings. So, oh yeah, data points this way, so we should go this way. But there's another component, which is the emotional component and the politics and all that. And that's a deeper thing. And it's like a little bit of a muddy environment, right? And that's probably another game altogether.
Yeah, it's so interesting how much of this really reminds me of product ops in the change management aspect. I love this idea of research is tolerated, right? And I think tolerated is exactly the right word. It's not necessarily accepted, it's tolerated as long as it validates where we're already going. And I'm wondering how somebody in a company without the research practice can maybe navigate these waters. I know it's a very tough place to be in. I think even in product management for product managers is sometimes hard to, well, A, make the time for evidence gathering, but B, when you have the evidence, then to push back and say, actually, I think we're going down, the slightly wrong path. Is there anything that individuals can do, or the way they might be able to approach such conversations that will make that a little easier in the future?
I borrow a framework from, well, there are many who think about this, like Annie Duke, Nassim Taleb, like they talk about decisions as bets. And I like to borrow that concept, and I usually bring it into conversations, right? So if we are making a decision here, we're betting that this is right. Imagine, you can do an analogy using a bet too, right? Imagine we need to make a decision on A, and we have all this little evidence. Is that enough to make this bet? Is this an expensive bet? It's just like a blind bet. It's going to the casino and just like putting all in on number 21, or is it just like going into something where you have like 50-50 or 60% success rate? So I try to frame that conversations that way, right? So how big is the decision? What are its implications, and how confident are we? How much data do we have, and how much data do we need in order to make this? Because at the end, if you don't have enough evidence, because the proper evidence gathering for whatever reason, maybe you didn't have time, you didn't have the structure or whatever, but you don't have enough evidence and you just need to make that decision. How confident, so how much of a risk is this, right? And you start from there. And when people realize that, well, if things go wrong, what are the consequences here? I would just like, are we going to waste how many resources? Are we gonna like lose something? Are we putting our product experience at risk? Are we, and there's also the argument that, well, let's just launch and see what happens once we launch. There's also another argument, but also like you're also putting the experience at risk. I was like framing that in terms of these bets, right? It's like, how big is this bet? How much are we willing to gamble here? Usually when you put that into those terms, like, well, this is a bit of a gamble, right? So people kind of like have second thoughts and maybe just like, well, maybe we need some more data. Maybe things are this is not necessarily wrong or right. It's not that if you just like take big risks or big gambles, it's wrong. I mean, sometimes you just need to. And sometimes it's like, we need to do this because of there are other reasons why you might make a decision with low quantity of data or not enough data. Maybe your competitor moved faster and you just don't want to lose the pace. And we need to launch this, and then we'll see how we make that work. And I understand that. But, we need to be aware of these trade-offs and this dynamics, right?
Both of you said, about the kind of, or alluded to that, kind of being empowered to kind of push back, in both roles, in product, in research, and let's face it, in all areas of the tech part of a business, is so important because, again, I personally see some parallels, and Tony, I'm glad you kind of picked up on this. I see some parallels in product management here as well. You know, in many businesses, let's call it out as it is, many businesses, the decisions are not at the product management level about ultimately what we do, regardless of what research has said, whether we do it or not. It's kind of really come from other parts of the business. Now, whether that's from leadership or whether that's in a sales-led business and whatnot. And, we go back to that old idea of product managers being more delivery managers, being more order takers, et cetera, et cetera. So it's such a parallel in that area that actually it's more just go do what we have said. So and again, that's why I come back to that point about how much of that is let's call it out, how much of that is a real problem for research in a business where it's kind of, well, no, just go and validate what we have said, and almost you need to validate what we have said. You need to go and get the research that backs up what we have said. Even worse than just kind of go and do the research on what we have said. And if you come back and find out the answer is wrong or the premise is wrong, sorry, then tell us and push back at that stage. So I personally see it as being almost quite a dangerous position to be in, in research in these times, under that premise, because conceptually research is the very start of the chain. If research says, yes, this is all fine to do, then everyone's going to push back on that and say, well, research said that this was the best thing for us to go and do. And if it's wrong, well, now we track it all the way back to the chain to go, well, the research was wrong. And you've steered us in a direction that ultimately is wrong. So have you got any further thoughts on kind of that piece?
On which of the two? Because research steering you in the wrong direction is a big topic, and also a topic on itself. But I think you mean the other one about people using research kind of like, well, you need to, like, as a validation machine.
Yeah, and I think that's the piece, and it's not even necessarily a validation machine. It's not validated one way or the other. It's more go and find evidence that backs up what we have said. And I'm really trying hard not to kind of align this to geopolitical things that are happening in the world right now as well. But it is a valid concern, and it is something that has always concerned me. When I've worked with research, and I've worked with some fantastic researchers right now, and I do sometimes question. Not in our business, actually, we're pretty good with that, but in other businesses who I've worked with, is that kind of what are you actually doing? All you're doing is evidence gathering on a very specific agenda, rather than doing true research.
Yeah. Let me switch that up a little bit, because I think researchers are well equipped by nature to take that mandate, go and find the data, and go back and kind of like help you make sense of that and question that. That's also why researchers, we sometimes have problems, because we are saying hard truth. It's like, well, this is not going to work out, and you start challenging, and people like find it personal, or they feel like their agenda is being questioned, or that it's going to be like that little cobble in your shoes, and it's like, well, this is not gonna go well if we keep involved in research, right? So then this creates like a different dynamic. But for me, the problem here is, and we go back to something I mentioned at the beginning, when companies that don't have researchers, and you have designers and product managers, or maybe other roles actually doing the research or undertaking the research, this is where things get complicated, because you get into this mindset of like you're trying your own dish, and you want to say, like, you don't want to say, well, I was wrong. It's really hard to say, like, I was completely wrong about this. And you need to have you need to be a very experienced designer or a very experienced product person to say, like, well, I was wrong and data says otherwise. And we just like, we question that. No ego here. It's like, we move forward. That's usually when I see the problem. When you research, in the end, is just another party involved. So we are kind of, different problem, because then creates like strange company dynamics, and research gets bypassed and escaped and so on, which is another topic. But for me, the issue here is when you have the same person who's making the decision, doing the research and cherry picking based on their agenda and based on what they need, and based on like, well, we did research, it says I was right, let's go forward. Sometimes you are right indeed. It's like, it's not that you always need to be wrong, but like, you have this, and you have this cherry picking, whether when you gather the insights or when you go and do the research. Sometimes I've seen plenty of folks saying, well, so you really like this feature, then right, great, fantastic, we ship it. And then you can see that in the interview saying, so this means you will use this feature, right? Yes. Okay. They say they use it, so this is good to go. You see that a lot. I try to address part of that in the book when I say, like, you need to have some quality standards, and you need to kind of abstain yourself. I'm like, just put things a little bit further and say, well, I'm just like, I'm here, I'm the data gatherer, so I need to analyze data, and then if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But that's usually where things start to get muddy, right? It's like when you have people using research as a way of professionally validating their agenda by cherry picking and doing lousy research. So two different problems. Researchers are in a tough spot too, because we call that out, because we are trained to just like not cherry pick and to ask the right questions. And so we push back, and that's where we get like, we become the bad guy in the movie, right? It's like, well, we had this really nice idea we designed, but research said we need to kill that. But what about all the time we spend here? Now we're just launching it anyway. And this is what happens sometimes in organizations. So two different
Yeah.
problems.
I really resonate with that, being in the product management seat, then going out to do research. It's incredibly hard to separate yourself from something you've already invested time in, right? It's actually it's that sunk cost fallacy almost. It's like, oh, but we already have a design. We already have something to put in front of users. So just give us one more week and it can be in production, regardless of what the people in the user interview maybe said, right? You at most maybe do a couple of UI tweaks and everybody pats themselves on their back going like, yeah, we researched the hell out of that feature. How can individual practitioners be a little bit more mindful about that? Like, how can we ourselves foster a better research practice if we don't have additional support?
Well, what I recommend is trying to learn a little bit more about this research techniques and quality standards and try to get better at interviewing. Careful, that's how I started. I started trying as a PM. I started learning about how to be better at interviewing. I read like Steve Portigal. I started with like Steve Blank, Get Out of the Building, right? Like just like a million years ago. And that's how I got curious about that. And then I wanted to get better at data gathering. And at some point it's like, well, I think I want to do this now. And that's how I became a researcher. But you don't need to do the whole transition to research, but you can definitely get better at that. And also trying to understand where in the process research should be, and also understanding what good enough looks like, and say, well, this is good enough, this is enough for what we need, and this is right for the decision we're trying to make. And I know it's hard to put yourself in that position of questioning your own work, but in the end it's like you're saving yourself from spending more resources from failure too. It's like if you build something people don't use, it's actually on you. It says like, well, you just shipped a feature that costed us a lot of development time or design or tokens. Now like people are using AI for everything, so they use a lot of tokens on this feature, and then nobody's using it, and it's also ruining experience. So getting knowledgeable with what kind of data you can find around the organization, what kind of data you could gather, and how can you polish your research chops if you want.
Yeah, and I think polishing your research ops engine is really also what it comes down to, because doing these things ad hoc is like reinventing the wheel every single time, right? It's like figuring out, oh shit, I need to speak to customers, then figuring out how to source them, what the legality of recording them is, and so on, right? Having that system around you where you can just then pick and choose the research practices that make the most sense for the step in the development life cycle. I think that alone, it requires some time investment, sure, but that alone can dramatically improve how often people will end up doing research at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a piece that you talk about which follows on from that, which is about kind of making sure this. I think you use the term flywheel. I think it's kind of momentum of doing research, good, bad, or indifferent, but doing research at all. And this is certainly something that I have absolutely found every time I've been in product ops and kind of had any kind of touch point on kind of the research arm of the business. Is some businesses kind of treat it as, well, do research when it's needed. Okay, and okay, in my book, okay, that kind of makes a little bit of sense. I get the premise of that, but it's not the sort of thing when you're moving in a fast-paced business and you're saying, right, okay, well, here we've got a new spike that we're gonna ramp up. We've had this great idea. Let's go and just start doing the research. Let's go and find our customers. Brilliant. Okay, well, how long does it take to go and source those people, source those customers? Think about what it is, the questions that we want to ask. What's the data we want to go and collect? If we haven't got already a good research ops system and tools to put all of this stuff into, we've got to go and spin all of that up as well and make sure that this is all going, that we've got we know what we're going to then go and analyze once we've got all those results in. And I'm going to talk to the master here. How long does that sort of process just take to spin that up to then have good research actually then ongoing? I think a lot of people kind of miss that setup phase whenever it's like, well, let's go and talk to customers. There's a massive amount of prerequisite that kind of needs to be ready and available first before we start picking up the phone.
Yeah, absolutely. And also on top of that, if you think, well, we need this big piece of research to inform this, usually the scope of that is pretty large. So it's natural that this is going to take long. So not only everything you said about like setting up the study, getting the right people, how do we reach out to them? How do we find them? Do we have the right methods? Do we have the right tools? What do we do with the output? So all this operation part, but also the scope of the research itself. If you need to inform this big decision because you went and did this, like, well, this is something we do once a quarter, it's like this huge thing. It's a completely different dynamic to actually how companies operate, or most companies operate. Like if you can afford that, or you can have someone do that, that's fantastic. You have this forward-looking research every quarter to see where should we take the company 6 months from now, 1 year from now. That's fantastic. If you have that, I mean, great, kudos to you. But usually, I think something like tighter. Oh, that's why I talk about this flywheel, or I use this loop. I call it like that's kind of like the core of what I call the research engines. You need to keep your scope tight of the decision or the question that you want to have answered, and then if your research is well scoped, you can time box it effectively, and then you build the operations around it. So once you know that you need research every X amount of days or every X period of time, you know how to build your operations, and you know also what you need to build. And also you get this constant feeding of insights, and when you have insights, you also have more questions, and this leads to more research. And this is how this is why this is a flywheel. This keeps moving, right? So you have a question, and then you go gather the data, and then you think about it, and then you make a decision. This is outcomes, and then you have more questions, and this is how it all starts. It's important that we scope that properly, because if you have this huge research, then it's also hard to digest. That's also part of like sometimes teams struggle with, like, well, I have all these insights, they're not actionable at all. How do I even put them into practice? And I just wanted this bit. I just ordered a slice of pizza and I got 5 boxes of focaccia. I didn't even order that. So that's also, sorry for for all those who are listening, focaccia and pizza are different things. But this is the point, and this is why I always push for this kind of rapid. Well, not necessarily rapid, because I think rapid has kind of like a little bit of bad fame. I don't know why I'm just translating from German in my mind right now, but it's like it has like a it's a dirty name or dirty word. It's like people say, oh, rapid research means like not rigorous, and it's just like just to check something. And quick and dirty is like some researchers would say like, well, that's not your research. And not necessarily that, but what I mean is like well scoped, tight scoped research where you have clear questions, or it will clearly inform a decision. And then once you have that, you can backtrack and say, well, we need this, this, and this will happen every month and a half. And then you can build everything. This is the intentionality that you need to build everything around that, right?
You mentioned something that I do want to touch on in this episode, because I think that's the second 50% of what people get wrong. It's what to do with the output of research. In your immediate decision making, right, within that tight scope of we had a question, we went to answer it. But B, also in the longer term view of, can we reuse the research? Can we gather more insights beyond just this one very specific questions we went out to ask?
So there are two topics that like I can go two ways here, and I think both actually address this point. So one has to do with the insights and the delivery of the insights or the findings. And I touch a little bit on this at the beginning. It's like people just like go and they say, hey, here are the insights. And they give you the little box of insights and they disappear, and these insights might not be actionable. Sometimes they take 2 months. You never heard of them before. You are not briefed. You hear them from the first time. So that's one thing, working on the delivery part, which is another one of the pillars in the book. So we've been talking a lot about infrastructure already. These pillars I call them CIC. So it's culture, infrastructure, and communication. Communication is the last one, and it's actually about this. Like, how do you share the findings? When do you find them? Sorry, when do you share them? How do you work on them together? And making it more of a teamwork effort rather than just like, hey, here's your little box. This is the pizza that you ordered. Goodbye. It's more like, hey, here are the findings. What can we do with that? What makes sense? What doesn't? So that's one part or one piece of the puzzle. And usually actionability is a big issue, right? It's like we deliver something and then it's like, we don't really know what to make out of it. That's one thing. The other thing is more into the infrastructure bit, is that, and it's related to how do we store the data and how do we make that data compound. And this is a core part of the I pillar, the infrastructure pillar. Couple of things here. On one hand, you have the data that you gather. So you do a study, you do study one, you gather some insights, you do study two, you probably can build on the previous insights, you do study three, and then everything compounds. But at the same time, you have other teams in the organization gathering insights. I always tell researchers or people doing research that we should be humble enough to think that we are not the only ones with customer touch points, right? So we have, if you're maybe in B2B, you have sales, you have customer success, you have support, you have some user feedback coming from maybe a touch point in the product. Maybe you also have marketing sending surveys. So you have maybe 5 or 6 customer touch points and they gather data. So how can you connect that data to what you are researching specifically? So maybe you have a question and you go and you do some research and then you say, well, the research I got me these things. And maybe I'm just gonna, using this lens, I'm gonna go and take a look at, I don't know, closed deals. So how did we manage to get these deals with these companies, and what brought them to us, or the other way around, lost deals or churn, like why did this company leave us, or understand that and try to connect, and then in the end you start triangulating, and this makes your output better, and this also helps your decisions because you'll be more confident, right? So to recap a little bit in that sense, so if you build a practice instead of doing something ad hoc, you start building the pipework to connect all that, right? It's like you say, well, I'm doing research. I have the tools I need. I have the process that I need to do the research and gather new data. Then I have a place where I can store the data that I gather from that study. And then I can connect it to either other pieces of data in the organization or new pieces of research that I bring. So in the end, you're just like getting in the book, I talk about something called the pantry. And I maybe Antonio, you will relate to this, but my grandma, I used to cook tagliatelle really good, but the recipe was always random based on, this is very very Italian analogy though, but it's not not always the same recipe. She would go and say, well, today we have artichokes and olives and whatever's left, and this is going to be a recipe now, and she makes it out of the new things. And what sometimes happens is that people tend to do more and more research, but they don't build a pantry to store those artichokes, to store those olives. And then everything, you start getting new recipes and better recipes based on what you get. And I think getting this right also helps the whole decision making across the organization, because you're creating a hub to connect all that, right?
I'm wondering if we should change the title of this podcast to be like MasterChef or something like that. We've wandered lovely into cooking, which I'd love to dive more into as well, but we haven't got time. It wouldn't be, I don't think it'd be one of our podcasts if we didn't kind of just pull AI into the conversation a little bit, because, using AI to do research is just going to be, and if not already is for many businesses, such a kind of a fast fix particularly I would imagine if you don't have an established research team person even, or somebody that has been kind of well trained is purposely doing that. Come back to the idea of maybe kind of the research being done just as part of the PM's job, when many PMs just don't know how to do good research. So kind of what are your thoughts, on this? And I pick up on a particular piece. I think that the kind of paraphrased from the book that AI generated insights and real research can look identical to leadership. How, will they tell the difference? And actually that presents a real problem, and because if that research isn't done well, if it isn't potentially validated by a human that can look at the research and say, yeah, actually, what AI has said is true, and we kind of come back up and we've got some belief and truth behind that, and trust behind that, versus just going, hey, this is what Claude said and I'm going to now put that on my slide deck.
Well, AI is changing everything, I would say, but I'm not pessimistic with AI. I'm just like, we need to be smart about it, and there are many ways in which AI can change the game in terms of research. So first of all, there are some things like AI moderation that they're improving quite fast and it's getting better. So you can do mm, probably not a full blown interview, but like at least kind of like some qual open ended at scale. So you can do like 6, 7, 8 questions and have the moderator run that. Probably we're still not at a point where they can moderate full blown interview the same way a researcher would do, but at least it's something. There are some other things you can speed up as documentation synthesis and so on. So that's great. We're making things more efficient, which is great because we have time to now we have more time to think and less time to do we spend less time doing the field work and more time thinking. At least I would hope so, right? Like probably the same in product, right? So if you have tools that automate some stuff and don't need to I'm apart from the research part, it's like maybe you just like your backlog is like organized differently, and you use like AI to automate your rubric and how you prioritize or so on. This can save you some time, so you can unblock some time to do other stuff. Thinking could be doing research, could be other things. So that I'm pretty optimistic about that. The risk is not AI, but its misuse, as always, right? Like AI is a tool like any other tool, and misusing the tool and using AI to feel like to check the research checkbox is dangerous, right? And it's complicated because now the output looks pretty convincing and realistic. If you go and ask any AI something thinking that they will guess, like, will users like this feature? Yes, great, we did research, so now we just go about it. Uh, I don't know. I mean, it's a bit exaggerated, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone actually did that. But I think that's where the issue is right now. It's like what do we use AI for, and what is kind of like out of bounds? How can we learn because in the end it's about telling good from bad. But it happens with AI and outside. If you don't know what a good interview looks like, you ask, hey, would you use this feature? And this is without AI. And now with AI, it's even worse because now it's like, well, if you don't know what's good from bad, you can tell good from bad. Maybe you ask AI to craft an interview guide for you, and it's full of leading questions. Or results, same, just like you just filter and say, well, AI made an average of these things, and in the end, it's just feeding you things. I think again, we need to be sharper with the critical thinking and try to look further than the convenience AI proposes, especially with findings, and also think about it, right? It's like if we're asking a chatbot would make pre-elaborate answers that's basing its answers on who knows what data. Are we actually confident that this is the right? I mean, probably when you stop and you think 1 minute about it, you kind of like you think like, well, probably not, right? So it's about questioning how we use it, and then if you have that in your organization, kind of like getting together and defining, well, is this realistic? Does this make sense? Are we actually, this is just BS written in a convincing way? And it goes back to one key thing, and it's the culture of an organization, right? If you don't believe in gathering evidence, if you don't believe in triangulating and getting different data points and spending some time into making sense of things, if you don't believe in that, AI is just another excuse to disguise your lack of belief in that. So before it was just like, let's just keep research and let's go with the hippo, the hype. The someone like a manager would decide something and let's go with it. A competitor did this, let's do it. I woke up and had this idea, let's go here. We skip research because research will slow us down. Research will say no and whatever. If you already have that ingrained in your mind, AI is just another tool to bypass that and to skip that. But if you think differently and say, well, we need data, we need good data. Could be more or less depending on the decision and the risk, and as we discussed in the beginning. But if you're there, it's easy to question AI because it's like, well, this is just like, it's fluff. So it goes, I think in the end, the core of it is a cultural problem. Do we believe in data gathering, real data gathering, or do we believe in like tarot cards for product decisions, right?
Oh, I want a set of tarot cards for product managers or product teams now. I think that's brilliant. Antonio, any final thoughts from yourself on this?
I mean, I was really lucky that in my first product ops job, I had research ops partners and I saw the amazing work they did and how it really supercharged individual PMs, right, to go out and do their own good research in collaboration with our own researchers doing, the really, really fancy, amazing stuff. So I've always had a soft spot for research ops, for researchers in general. And I think there's a lot we can do in product ops to get maybe 50% of the way there, right? Like you don't need to have deep research expertise to start building that pantry, right? That is operations. And I think that's something that we in product ops are well positioned to do if there is nobody else like that in our organizations. I would really urge anybody listening in product ops to think about what is the one thing I can do that will help our teams go out there and do their own research and do it well.
Fabulous. I had literally nothing to add to that. I think that's absolutely spot on. That bring this back to kind of the product ops, topic and show and everything else like that. What we are best placed, or we are well placed, I should say. Sorry, that we can enable this to happen. And actually, I think on a more behavioural front as well, make sure that actually research is. There's a piece we really didn't come to today, and I did have this written down, which was making sure that research and research teams, researchers have a seat at the table, not necessarily at the big top table, with the CEO and et cetera, but actually, when we're crafting our plans, when we're crafting our roadmaps, et cetera, really should be in the room. There's a whole other episode we could talk about where design fits in all of this as well. Completely different topic, but it's the same problem. It's the same conversations that are happening. Why are design not having a seat at the table? Why are research not having a seat at the table to at least have their say and be able to influence in the right ways? Or if nothing else, being able to be aware of what those ideas are, what those bets are, so that they're not, and this is something that I have seen in my career, is that research ends up getting involved for the right reasons, but far too late. It's only come down through the grapevine, through third and fourth and fifth parties to say, this is what the plan is, and yes, we need to kind of have some researchers. Fantastic. That was the decision made 3 months ago. Had we have the time to do this properly? And if it's been made 3 months ago, we've gone so far down the process now that what's the point in doing the research? We've already made the decision. We've already made such a heavy investment in this. So I think it's right. I think what product ops, making sure that the right tools and facilities, but also having the seat at the table, pushing to make sure that those voices are being heard alongside all of these other great professionals. We are unfortunately out of time. We could have talked a hell of a lot more about this topic because I've genuinely learned a lot, and it's also kind of sparked in me some of the things that I've potentially taken for granted a little bit, particularly when I was back in the day when I was a product manager as well. So, Julian, I'd like to absolutely thank you for being our guest today on the show.
Thank you for having me. Had a great time.
Fabulous. Somewhere about here, we'll make sure there's a link to your book when I go through and edit all of this. Do please, to our audience, connect with any of us on LinkedIn. Thank you to everybody watching today. And Antonio and I will look forward to welcoming you on the next episode of the Product Opscast. Thank you, everybody.